Space, the final frontier. These are the podcasts of the podcast Enterprise. Its only mission to explore story structures, to analyze our favorite characters and plot lines, to boldly talk about what everyone has seen before. Hello and welcome everybody to Podcast Enterprise. This is the place where we dissect stories from episodes of Star Trek the original series. I am Bala Ramadurai and with me I have my co-host Parvati Ramkumar. Say hello Parvati.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our podcast. If you like Greek mythology, I think you're going to have fun today.
Oh boy. All right. So this episode is called Who Mourns for Adonais? I think that's what it is. I'm going to pronounce it Adonais. So summary over to you, Parvati.
So, when this episode begins, first of all you find that Scott is flirting with a new ensign on the bridge. Her name is Carolyn Palamas. He seems to have an interest with her, which is something very new. We haven't seen that before. After that, we learn that the Enterprise is en route to a planet called Pollux 4. And as they near the planet, some sort of an energy field crops up and it takes the shape of a giant green hand and it holds the Enterprise in place. And this energy field is so powerful that the Enterprise cannot move, it cannot fire, it cannot break free. And as Spock notes, this energy field, even though it looks like a hand, it is not made of any sort of organic matter. It is not a living thing. It's just plain energy. So this is very confusing because what sort of an entity can create that sort of an energy field? And then they find a certain figure come up on the viewing screen. It's just a head, but it looks human. It's got a laurel wreath on its head and it claims to be Apollo and as the Greek god Apollo, and it's not going to let the Enterprise go. So Kirk and a small landing crew, including the ensign, the new ensign, have to teleport down to the planet, where they're met with this strange, muscular, huge man who claims he's the Greek god Apollo. He lays claim to the ensign Carolyn, and he's interested in her, and he takes her away, and she is obviously taken in by him also. He wants the landing party to stay back on Pollux 4, and he also wants all of the crew aboard the Enterprise to come down and make themselves slaves to himself. He believes he's a god, and it seems that he is a god, and Kirk somehow reasons that he probably is the actual Greek god Apollo, and he believes that these beings, all of these gods, are actually some sort of space travelers that came to Earth a long time ago and sort of bedazzled the primitive inhabitants of the planet and took on the guise of gods. By they find that Apollo is very, very capricious. He's got some sort of a lightning bolt from his fingertip. He can destroy things, he can kill people, but each time he does something to that effect, he weakens. And this is noticed by Chekhov. Long story short, what happens is somehow Kirk and the others have to get out of this planet. They have to have the Enterprise released. So basically, they have to get away from there. They have to prevent the rest of the crew from getting enslaved by this character. And Kirk decides the only way to do that is to try and turn Ensign Carolyn against Apollo. And her loyalty will be tested. Therefore, he tells her something, and finally, she sees the truth and she spurns Apollo. That makes him go into a meltdown, and Spock from the Enterprise out in orbit discovers that it is possible to punch some holes into that energy field and fire the phasers. So they discover that the temple where Apollo is lodged has some sort of energy source, and if they fire the phasers there, they'll be able to destroy that temple and Apollo's energy. They do that, they're released, and Apollo becomes heartbroken. He cannot have any more followers, he says, and he disappears. It's some sort of a death, as we understand, but not exactly. And he disappears, and they go back to the Enterprise free from this entity that they don't really understand. Back to you, Bala.
In the teaser, we get to know that they come across a very ordinary planet, but they're far out where no people have gone before, I guess. So Pollux 4 is that class M planet. But suddenly they find this green giant hand and which grabs them and pulls them to a dead stop. It's a field of energy they can find, it's not tissue. So that's what they know up to the teaser. We don't know where or what this hand is from, who is doing it, but all they can see is a hand which has grabbed the Enterprise to a dead stop. They can't move from there. The first act starts with some basic attempts to free themselves of this energy force field that's all around them, which is not letting them go beyond this planet. Turns out it's being controlled by a person, a solitary person on the surface of the planet. At the end of this act, they get to know that it is Apollo. They are in what looks like some version of Olympus. He grows big in size and announces that he is Apollo. He cuts off all communication, the phasers are useless, everything is gone. That's what first act was about, introduction of Apollo. Then in the second act, they're trying their best to free themselves of this giant hand. Also, they are not able to get in touch with the landing party either. So neither of them can see each other. While on the planet, they're getting to see the real power of Apollo, what all he can do, what all he can change, everything. And his love story with Carolyn starts right there. And that's all part of second act that they can see. At the end of the second act, it was so far so good. Nothing major was happening, but now Scotty is thrown back and is knocked out, and Kirk is also choked, and Lieutenant Palamas or Carolyn is also gone. So that's the end of second act. Apollo is in full control of the landing party, and there's no hope in the starship either. They can't seem to get through at all. Nothing. So it's pretty bleak at the end of second act. At the start of the third act is with the landing party, at least Chekhov, Scotty, the doc, and the captain trying to get out of the clutches of Apollo, somehow to get free of this. Looks like they're going to be in there for a long time, but they're learning that there are some chinks in his armor, and they could somehow try to get through to Apollo, or even try to capture him. That's jump on him. That's what the plan they have. While on the starship, they are trying to solve problems themselves. Spock is trying his best with the people on board to see if they can contact the landing party with Uhura's help, as well as through to the to scan where the landing party is and all that. So that's what is happening in the third act. By the end of third act, they realize that the only way to get through to Apollo is going to be via Carolyn, or her loyalty towards the Starfleet, or their humanity even, if you will. It's up to Kirk now to try and talk her out of her love for this Apollo. Looks like she got the message, but we are not so sure at the end of third act. Fourth act starts with the fact that Starship Enterprise has found the source of power, and now they have an attack plan. And Spock, in the meantime, has also found a way to punch holes in the force field, even though he couldn't neutralize the entire force field. And Carolyn, on the other hand, is also working with Apollo to somehow spurn him and somehow make him angry and try to turn the tide. So that's what she's attempting to do. And Scotty has got his act together as well. At the end of the fourth act, of course, the temple is destroyed. Apollo disappears into thin air, and Carolyn is weeping, boo-hoo, and and Kirk somehow feels sorry for Apollo. If only he could have not, or and McCoy himself also, they feel that, well, it shouldn't have come to that. Maybe he could have done some other way, but unfortunately they had no choice. So all in all, a great episode. So
Yeah.
let's get into the details. So Parvati, let's start from the very beginning. What do you think about Who Mourns for Adonais? First of all, why is this title? I have no idea why is it called that.
So I believe that it's probably because this character Apollo, who calls himself Apollo, he's probably of a race of forgotten gods. They are almost completely forgotten. And so, if he were to disappear, who's to know? And
Hmm.
like the rest of the gods disappeared, and he tells the crew of the Enterprise about it. Or more specifically, he tells Lieutenant Palamas about it, that Hera and Athena, all of them just disappeared. And it's some sort of an in between state, similar to death, but not death as the humans would understand it. And nobody even knew that they disappeared. Nobody knew about their appearance, and nobody knew that they were still alive and that they were real and they were not just mythical creatures that were parts of fairy tales. They were actually real. And so it comes eventually, I think, maybe because at the end of the episode, you find Apollo himself going into that state of death or undeath. And there's no one to know or actually mourn him. That's what struck me when I watched this episode, Bala. So the episode itself, I thought it was fascinating, like our dear doctor said, but to coin a phrase, it was fascinating. It was very interesting because it also plays upon the ancient astronaut trope, I believe, where the gods of the ancient world were actually space-faring visitors who had so much technology that the sheepherders of that time believed that they were gods. And Apollo here can do a lot of strange things. He has the lightning bolts, he can control the weather, he's able to send out that energy field type attack that a giant hand is able to send out into space and hold the Enterprise in place. He is able to do a lot of things that are godlike. They may not be supernatural powers, but they are godlike. And even now, in whatever era the Enterprise is in, nobody really understands where his power is coming from or how he uses that power. They pinpoint the source of the power to the temple, but they don't know what it is. So essentially, he still is godlike. I found that very fascinating.
This reminds me of what people talked about Area 51, right? So
Yes,
they were saying like the 1960s when they were experimenting with all sorts of technology that was way ahead of its time. One particular example I can think of is the B-2 bomber,
yes,
which actually looks bizarre if you think about it, just two wings put together, right? So if you showed it to a 1960 person who has not seen an airplane at all, is the probably just seen drawings of some airplane somewhere, and you show them an airplane where two wings are put together, it's a bomber, they would think unidentified flying object. So same way, I think even when you see people who can transform matter the way Apollo does it, it was probably 5000 for us it's what 2000
yeah,
2500 years ago. It would really been fascinating for them completely. So makes a lot of sense in one way. In one way you think, oh, this guy is just like our square of Gothos and making all of this stuff up. Maybe it's like that too, but suddenly you realize, oh, probably not. All the names that he's rattling out, it's not only for our benefit, probably the way it was. It gives it an alternate theory to so many gods and how it's probably just not imagination, but maybe based on fact.
yes. That was very interesting. And Apollo himself, I find it very odd that he was stuck in this fugue where he believed that the humans would still accept him after 5,000 years have passed. You would think that once the humans attained space travel and they're able to travel from planet to planet and um, solar system to solar system, they would be a little bit more skeptical of someone like him who's Apollo's technology hasn't developed. It's already reached some sort of a peak and it's not going to go any further, but the humans are going further. And Apollo, for some reason, cannot reconcile the two and still thinks that he will be able to bedazzle the humans who have space travel, which is a little odd in my opinion, but interesting at the same time.
That's the last memory of the human beings that he knows of.
Yeah.
So it's probably that's what is stuck in your head, right? So you can't
Yeah.
possibly imagine you and the level at which they were probably difficult for him to imagine that they could one day try and reach out for the stars, as in his own words, and
True.
actually make this spectacular travel. But not only technology, even philosophy wise, people would transform, probably very difficult for him to fathom either also. I don't know, maybe that's the last memory of of the humans that he had interacted with. And
Yeah.
also this is emotional, right? So emotions, it can't be very rational. So you
Yeah.
know that they are worshipping you, they dote on you. So he would think, oh, the progeny will also probably be doing that. They're after all your ancestor who did that. You would probably also do the same thing to me, given all the amazing stuff we had given you, provided you. You should be the
Yeah.
same too.
You should
Yeah,
be. Yes.
it's understandable, but doesn't make it right. But I'm just trying to see from Apollo's point of view.
Apollo also, at the same time, he's surprisingly accepting of the fact that the Enterprise is in space and they have phasers in their hands and they have technology. So he's kind of a mystery. He's an enigma that way. He knows about the technology and he references those technologies quite easily. He's accepted them, and at the same time, he wants them to sacrifice a deer. I don't understand him.
I think he's just picking up on the last thing he remembers of them again.
Yeah.
Oh, these were your rituals. Maybe it's still around. Who knows? Given our day-to-day life, also we do so many rituals that are, I don't know, dating thousands of years ago, right? So
Yes.
so those things, probably Apollo thinks that, hey, since you did that so long ago, maybe this is what you should do. You're right. I mean, when they see these communication tools and phasers and all that, he seems to know how to neutralize them. He's seen that. But on the other hand, he's also doing this, saying that,
True.
okay, you do your shepherding, I will provide for you. Just waves his hand like that and says, I will provide for you from now on. You don't have to do these fancy things.
He treats them like children, and in a way they are children to him because he is over 5,000 years old, obviously, and to see these little humans wandering around, maybe he feels some sort of a concern, but his expression of that concern is absolutely terrifying. He's incredibly capricious. You never know what he's going to do next.
Yes, yes. Yeah, the terms that he uses from the very beginning. You left your plains and valleys and you've gone on to this voyage. The music of the pipes. I have withdrawn the wind from your sail. The terminology that he uses is
Yeah.
so archaic for these people that it's anachronistic for these guys. Like, what's going on? Why is this guy speaking? I mean, I've seen this in Shakespeare class, probably. That's it. Even older than that. Why is he using that now?
True, he's probably even quoting from the Iliad and the Odyssey by Homer. He seems to be living in that timeline. He's not come out of there. And he's using the same phrases and terminology that an ancient Greek poet might have used. And he's also referring to Agamemnon and Hector and confusing the hell out of these poor characters.
But he also knows how to punish them. In the first act, he does that. You're going to do this. I'm going to now crush your ship like an eggshell, and he
Yes, he
actually
does say
does
that.
that. He does that extremely effectively. That Kirk says, "Okay, okay, you win. You stop whatever you're doing." Right. So it's pretty scary because he has access to such amazing power. He's able to do that. Even now, he's leagues ahead of these guys
He's
in terms
leagues
of
ahead of
technology
them.
and.
I think his biggest downfall was probably the fact that he's a little too straightforward and didn't anticipate that the humans would try and reject him, first of all, and then try to
Mm,
trick him into destroying himself mostly. The display of that trickery, that treachery, so in quote unquote treachery, is what finally broke him because he didn't it's not something he would have ever expected. He somehow thought that the loyalty of the humans towards these gods would still exist. And so he waited. All the other
mm,
gods disappeared because they lost faith. He
mm,
waited thinking that the humans would still have some modicum of faith towards the gods. And
mm.
they crushed it so completely. And I think that was his final downfall.
The fact that he seemed to have waited for this long, it conveys the impression that he still had faith in the human race. He reveals that himself, saying that, yes, I've been waiting for this long for you guys to come out
Yes.
and reach out here. Yeah. Wonder why they left Earth and came here if they were so. He does mention that guys like you and Agamemnon and Odysseus and Hector,
True.
all these guys rebelled and slowly we have forgotten. That's what he
True.
says.
True. He believes in that one pioneer who leads his people to greater victory. And he sees
Mm,
something in Kirk that reminds him of those Greek heroes. And that's why he keeps saying their names, repeating their names. And he felt probably that since the earth was conquered by characters like these who took
mm,
ships and took their people to war and won these wars and all of those events that happened in the Greek epics. Given his long life and the fact that he's over 5,000 years old, maybe gave him some sort of an insight into what would happen next. And that is, you would build a ship that can travel between the stars. And that made him very poetic, also describing all of that.
Apollo is the god of poetry, isn't
Yes.
he? It's not so evident in this episode, but you can see him do that kind of referencing to many things. There's a lyre present there because he's the god of
Yes.
music, and of course, poetry also. It's pretty cool.
It also showed something of Captain Kirk's character, because you're trapped here with this extraordinarily powerful being who is actually the Greek god Apollo. And how do you get your people out of this? It required him to use all of his wits, because as this episode goes on, you find that Apollo is still, like you said, leagues ahead of the humans.
Hmm.
And whatever technology he relies on can utterly crush the Enterprise. So again, what Captain Kirk here has to do is he has to use some sort of wit to make Apollo self-destruct, like he does to a lot of computers, but still he has to use his own intellect against him. That was quite frightening, because you also see Scott getting thrown about here and there like a rag doll, and then you find the lieutenant going after Apollo all starry-eyed and idiotic, and it was very painful. Then you have the Enterprise up there in space, held in place by that green hand, which is also very creepy if you ask me. And Spock up there is trying to figure out which nuclear device to detonate to punch holes into it, and it was altogether quite a nightmarish scenario.
Kirk relied on his science officer to do his thing.
Yeah.
So he's already motivated him there and got onto the surface, and he's
Yeah.
lost contact. So that's one chip down. The second chip was his lieutenant, one of his people going away, defecting to the other side. Now
Yeah.
there's no way to. Now he has only four people, and Chekhov is so inexperienced. He's 22. I mean, he's
He's
just
22.
joined the ranks, so
Yeah.
is there. All he has is two senior officers, and
Mm.
Scotty, he doesn't listen to him. He's trouble with controlling himself because Carolyn is gone that way. He has trouble listening and coordinating. So
Yeah.
now what does he do? And it is phaser is gone, his communicator is gone. All he has left, like you said, is his wits. And
Yeah.
now how does he do that? So he says, okay, I've got four people. Now what do I do with these people? And he finds that one tiny weakness in that scary being, and he
Yeah.
tries, even if it's one person, the other three can still do. That's his big risk taking ability right there.
It's a huge risk, because you saw how Caroline was behaving to Apollo, and the risks there was, what if she had just gone and told him that the humans are trying to, you know, plot against him. And it was also very funny when they attempted to insult Apollo and, you know, make him angry. She steps in and acts the heroine and
Sa-
tries to save them.
Saves them.
It is so incredibly frustrating, and you're sitting there and wondering, why would she do that?
Actually, her character starts off right at the beginning, right when Scotty is trying to take her out for a cup of coffee, and she's like, "Oh, I'm so tired," and no, I don't. So she's at the start. So McCoy rightly catches it, saying, maybe Scotty likes her, but I'm not sure if she likes him." And he
True.
catches on that smallest of cues, and it turns out it is true because when Apollo shows himself, she's immediately fallen for him, and she's like gone in
I
two
know.
seconds. This guy buys her a nice costume or whatever that costume was, which and off she goes, and that's it, done.
That's it.
You don't see Carolyn anymore.
All it took for her to defect was that skimpy dress. That's it. I'm really disappointed in her taste.
Exactly. So that's and Scotty is like, oh God, she's gone after that guy because he's a bag of tricks. Uh,
A little more than a bag of tricks, but Scotty is too furious to see that.
uh, but does he say we also have a bag of tricks, or is it Kirk? I think it's Scotty because
Yeah,
Usually he's the one who's proud of the ship, and he's ready
yes,
to immediately show off what all the ship can do as the
exactly.
chief engineer. So it must be Scotty who, oh, we have a few bags of tricks, a bag of
Ourselves,
tricks
yeah.
ourselves. You don't have to show off your little party tricks. We have that too.
I think partly what happened to Carolyn was also you do get an idea of what she specializes in, and that is archaeology and anthropology.
Mm,
Maybe it was an interest in ancient history that drew her to Apollo in the first place,
mm, mm,
and in the second place, Apollo is just larger than life. He's much bigger
mm.
than the average man. He is too
Right.
much. He's too out there. His presence is overwhelming. Maybe that also played a part in drawing her to him because she has never seen something like this. He's not exactly human, even though he looks human. He's beyond human. And that must have confused her quite a bit, I feel. She wasn't dithering, but there was something in Apollo which Scotty did not have because Scotty is just a mere mortal and he can't compare to a Greek god, but still,
Mm.
yes.
It would have been interesting if a parallel story of Athena showed up, and because Athena is also wise and a leader. Maybe it would have been Captain Kirk would have been fascinated by her. So
True, true.
I'm just thinking, because you admire something that you really look up to,
True.
and you try to see who all has it, and you start one quote unquote worshipping them. But
Yeah.
in this case, it Carolyn totally fell for this. This also reminds me of that Martha McGyver's in Space Seat. Her topic was the 20th century, that
True.
kind of
She had studied history, huh? I
history.
remember
So
that.
that
Yes.
was her subject, and that too particularly, she's fascinated by dictators. And when a
True.
dictator showed up, she like, oh wow, that's amazing. Even though it's pure evil, she doesn't see that. Same thing here, I guess.
I was a little disappointed in this episode that we actually didn't get to see Athena or Hera or one of the goddesses. We didn't see any of them. I would have really liked to see how sane Captain Kirk would have been had he seen one of them.
Mm,
Because you do see that Kirk has a fascination for extraordinary women. And I don't
mm,
know if one of the Greek goddesses, Athena, if she had shown up, she would have put him in his place, but it would have
mm.
been interesting to see that. And
Yes, yes.
instead, we are just stuck with Apollo throughout, which is kind of disappointing.
It probably also tells you the time this episode came out, right? In the 60s.
Yeah,
This probably
true.
was the line that would have worked. I,
Yeah,
I think it worked great given that time. But now,
yeah,
given our time and how things have changed, I'm sure an
yeah.
alternate line like this would really help.
I was also a little surprised, disappointed maybe, at how quickly Lieutenant Palamas went towards the other side. Like I said before, you give her one skimpy dress and it's not even a fascinating color, and that's it. And she's just, completely overwhelmed by this guy, Apollo, and she goes after him. And she's trying to convince Kirk about how wonderful Apollo is and how he's going to look after them, and she's totally gone. It was
Now,
disturbing.
I think the last straw for Caroline to
Yeah.
go to the other side was her boss being choked. So that was it. My commanding officer choked. Yes, boss, you're my new one. I'm done. Seeing your boss written pain like that, and completely
Yeah.
not able to speak. Oh, why not?
I mean, if he's so weak, she might as well go to the stronger side. But that is Apollo. A little predictable given the trajectory these Star Trek episodes have been taking because we see in many of these that the women are the cause of the problem. Like here, you
Mm,
see her go after Apollo, and in the previous ones, like you said, we saw uh, another character go after Khan, Nooney, and Singh. Why is
mm,
that? It kind
mm.
of plays up probably on the sensibilities of the audience at that time and what the
Right.
studio allowed to be shown. But
Yes.
still, it's an interesting thing to look at. A little crazy, but still interesting.
I like Apollo also starts giving out his plans, saying, okay, so now that you're on my side, I'll make a goddess out of you. Okay, that's your career plan. Maybe you'll become a mother to all the gods and goddesses. And then next we'll have some few gods and goddesses also running around. Okay, so this is good. I can see how it can go for the next 1,000 years.
I'm also very impressed that he latched on to the human race. He should have tried these with the Vulcans or the Klingons. It would have been really
Klingons.
funny.
Klingons, yes, definitely.
Or maybe
Yeah.
he would have got along with the Klingons. You never know. There was a missed opportunity for him.
They would have accepted him as their powerful.
I find it crazy that all of these gods
Hmm.
just sat around waiting for the humans to reappear. Why didn't they use their powers on some of the other races? Like I said, they would have gotten along very well with the Klingons. Maybe some of them would have got along well with the Vulcans. How do you don't know? Maybe they could have been a god to the Romulans. Why did they wait for the humans for so long? That didn't make much sense, especially
Hmm.
given their power.
Right. He says gods need love, admiration, and worship. I don't know. I'm not sure if Klingons would have given them that.
Also, they could have
Vulcans
so much
definitely
power.
no,
Yeah,
no. All you would have got is logic out of the whole
the
thing. So
Romulans maybe.
these are all emotions. I don't think even Spock would have done that.
True.
So the
It's
humans are the only ones probably in this lot who can possibly
the
give him that.
there were some other races as we see later, and
Ah.
you never know. I mean, maybe some of them could have given them what they wanted. I find it very odd that you would focus on and be fixated on a very odd race like the human race just to, and you wait for thousands and thousands of years for the humans to come when there are so many others around. And
Hmm.
we don't, I mean, at least as of this 1960s Star Trek, we don't exactly know what the Romulans are capable of. Maybe they could have
Right.
given these characters their love and devotion, whatever it is they crave. We don't
Hmm.
know. And we also see in a later episode there are some blue-skinned aliens and some odd-looking ones. We don't know what those aliens are capable of. So
Hmm.
it's not a very smart move to sit around waiting for the humans to reappear.
Hmm. But on the other hand, their sense of time is
Yeah,
very different from what a
true.
human looks like and thinks like. I'm thinking maybe for them, just sitting around waiting is probably okay.
Maybe, but at the
And
same time, the time
yeah,
was too much for Athena
yeah,
and
yeah.
Hera's.
It is quite a
Uh,
bit even for them.
yeah,
You're right.
even for
That's what they
them.
revealed, right? Hera was the first one who died, and then followed
Yeah.
by Artemis and all those other people.
So I was thinking while I saw that scene where he was describing all of this to Lieutenant Palamas, I was thinking if there was a real threat of these gods dying, they could have sought out other sources of their nourishment, whatever it is they're looking for. Instead, they just decided to fade away. I am very puzzled by this behavior.
Hmm.
They allowed
Yeah.
themselves to die out, which is sad in one sense, but also kind of silly on the other hand.
Right. Hmm. They don't explain a few things. For example, if they had gone all the way to Earth, and why did they come all the way back to
True.
this? If it's their home,
Yeah.
then like you said, they could have had other sources of quote unquote nourishment. What's going on there? That's not very evident. So
True.
as an episode, I think it's self-contained.
Yeah.
It worked, but there's the backdrop there. It makes us curious, saying why did they come back again? If they're so, I understood. Okay, Earth, they're not wanted anymore. They don't get their worship. They probably were looking around, they didn't find anything. They came all the way back home. But what's the reason for the wait? Didn't they
Yeah.
go again, faring again, or scouring across the galaxy to find more people to see if they can get the same love, admiration, worship? Why stay put at a place?
And there was something else that puzzled me quite a bit about Apollo because you see his power and you know how much he can do, and he can single handedly crush the Enterprise. Now, if all the gods had banded together, their
Hmm.
power would have been incredible and they could have crushed Earth just like that. And if you show that much power to Earth, I mean,
Hmm.
it doesn't matter that there were new religions springing up. They could have still retained their power by showing how much they can do. Instead, they have all of this lightning and thunderbolts and all of that at their disposal, and they still lost Earth. It doesn't. I don't know. I can't wrap my head around it because of how much Apollo can do. And all if all of them had just banded together, they could have retained their spot on Earth. Instead, they just decide to withdraw. They take
Hmm.
all their powers with them. They withdraw to this far-flung planet, which is maybe their home. I don't know, but anyhow, they withdraw here and then they just fade away. That's
Hmm.
strange.
Yeah, that's a lack of either determination or creativity. I don't know. One of these is
One
definitely
of these are
lacking,
probably both.
or both. Yeah. What another thing I noticed in this particular episode
Mhm.
was this. I think they've gone back to this Enterprise. There's something happening, and then followed by the planet where something is happening, back
Yeah,
and forth. And it was a good balance. It wasn't okay. Let's wait. Oh, we are the landing party. That's fine. Good. Now back to the adventure. So
yeah,
it wasn't like that. It was
yeah.
action happening at both levels,
Huh.
and they were supporting each other. So this is the
Yeah,
part I really liked, and it was meaningful. I mean, there was a mission to
true.
be accomplished.
Yeah,
For example, Spock works with Uhura and tries to make sure that they have a bypass transmitter
yeah,
for them to reach the landing party. And
true.
then he's working with Sulu to make sure that they have identified the power source. He also runs the problem of, now there's a third approach of how do you punch holes into this force field. So
Exactly. Yes.
they work, and when they get in touch, they're ready. Now they're ready because he's not just sitting there and waiting for things to happen.
He
Hmm.
plays a good leader in this episode. He manages to get them working together and he manages to coordinate their efforts very effectively. And that's why they were able to finally punch holes into that green hand.
Right.
It's very interesting. And so, if he had been the leader he was shown to be in our previous episodes, the ship would have
Galileo
crashed.
7.
Galileo 7, the ship would have crashed. That would have been it, and all of them
Yeah.
would be herding sheep right down there on that planet. But he did a good job.
Main thing he didn't do was
Yeah,
to try to do everything himself. Just
yeah,
exactly like how Kirk would have done. He
yeah,
said the right things to them and just walked off. He told Sulu, you need to find the energy source. This guy says, oh, but this whole planet is so big, I can't seem to find it. Okay, do the
yeah.
reverse then. That was Kirk. That was an imprint of Kirk. That's
Very
unbelievable.
true. That
So,
was
and
a.
he says, okay, now eliminate everything. You mean the whole planet? Of course, the whole planet has. Sulu himself realizes Spock does not answer that question. I will do the entire planet.
He also did a very good job with Uhura. In the
Yes,
beginning, he tried to get her to work faster, and when she admitted that she couldn't, he
mm.
praises her. That was an excellent job.
He's getting the hang of human leadership. Definitely,
He's
Kirk's influence has totally rubbed off. We can totally tell in this episode.
true. I mean, in a situation like this, if we had the Spock of Galileo 7, like I said, I mean, Apollo would have had a field day with the Enterprise, but he did a good job here.
Another character which is totally amazing was Chekhov. I mean, he
Oh,
doesn't have a lot of lines, but whatever he did was really good. I loved it.
he also
So.
had the worst hairstyle in the history of Star Trek. What is that hairstyle?
I think they were trying because I've seen Walter Koenig in his regular hair, so he doesn't look like
Yes.
that. My impression is this is what the US at the time thought Russians had as a hairstyle, and that's my guess. Maybe that's what their impression was, that
Or
all
they
of the
tried to
Russians.
make the actor look a lot younger than he actually was. You
Okay.
cover half his face with his hair and you won't know how old he is. And if he says he's
Ah.
22, fine, he's 22. I can't see his face anyway.
That could also be another one, right? So the funniest moment for me was this guy says he becomes so giant and he's sitting on the throne and he
Yeah.
says, I am Apollo, and he says, I am the Tsar of all Russians.
Sure, why not? I mean, if that's Apollo, why can't he be a Tsar? Why not?
Why not? That was amazing. That was a
And it
quick
also
quip.
shows the brashness of his age. He should learn to control himself. This is not the time to be making jokes. You're faced with this technologically advanced, terrifying being that calls itself Apollo, and this is what you have to say. You're sitting there and joking.
And the next time he does that is, and they say, oh, McCoy says, oh, there's probably this taking energy from somewhere and channeling it through his body.
Yeah.
And Chekhov says, oh, there are plenty of such examples that in nature, electric eel and this creature and that creature. And McCoy immediately butts in, not the entire encyclopedia. And he
I
says,
mean,
Fox been contaminating the
yeah.
boy.
I mean, he has to show his knowledge. He's not an empty head. He's
And
got
then
it
that's
too.
that's when I noticed actually when Spock goes away, Chekhov is the one who looks at his station. It is true, he hangs out the same places that Spock hangs out at. That was very good.
True,
Oh,
true.
the third one was the cat in Minsk. It says, you mean the Cheshire cat? No,
The
no, no.
Cheshire
That was
cat.
a cat in
That is a
Minsk.
cat and means everything he turns Russian. Everything is story or a Russian legend. I'm surprised you didn't try that with Apollo and say you're a Russian creation that eventually turned Greek.
Yeah. Chekhov's last one was with this. Carolyn shows up again, and now Kirk wants to sort of sway her to his side. So he's
Yeah,
going to go and counsel Carolyn. And
yeah.
Chekhov says, oh, may I assist? And he says, how old are you? And Chekhov says, 22. Okay,
22.
just stay back. This is not for you.
There's no space for children here, I think.
That was amazing. I mean, few things, but Chekhov totally amazing.
He was very entertaining given the seriousness of the rest of the episode, and all the characters are struggling and trying to figure out how to escape Apollo's schemes. And you have Carolyn here defecting, and check everything is Russian, he's a czar. And one
Yeah,
of the most important things, and
right.
that is he noticed that Apollo is weakening each time he uses his energy. The lightning bolt, every time Apollo uses it or draws upon it, he weakens, and only Chekhov notices that, and that's a crucial bit of information.
That was sharp of him. He did notice that. And
When they tried to anger Apollo and wear him down, we had
oh,
Carolyn playing the hero, and that was
oh,
heroine.
it pretty much spoiled their entire plan. And
And Kirk is trying to shoo her away, and without Apollo saying, "How do you get her away from this scene?" But nope, it doesn't
Hmm.
work.
That scene between Carolyn Palamas and Captain Kirk was pretty good. I know he starts off the speech with saying, okay, fun's over. Now we need to focus on duty. Are you ready for it? And Carolyn is like, what the heck is he talking about? What duty? I love him. That's it. Not, I'm done with all this duty stuff. Here we are. We're going to settle down here. This is where our future life is. I'm quite happy here.
Yeah,
And then he does his thing. It slowly, steadily he gets her in order.
he appeals to the officer in her, I think, and that
Mm,
works.
yeah,
Somehow, somewhere, she's still a disciplined officer of the Enterprise, and Kirk manages to reach that and talk some sense into her. That was pretty good. I mean, she shouldn't have done what she did, but eventually she did come through.
oh, so that is reference to in the first scene itself, right? The teaser, you know, McCoy says, "Oh, she'll just run off. You may lose and Kirk says something to the effect that I may not end up losing an officer." And then he realized, "No, I will end up losing an officer." Probably
Exactly.
there is where he gets that thing saying, "Okay, I don't want to lose her as an officer." Good point. I
True.
think that's what he was trying to get out of her here.
Somewhere within her training, her efficiency, and her logic, all of it
Hmm.
is there beneath the surface. It's been her emotions have been overwhelmed by Apollo, but what she actually is and what she is capable of, that's still there beneath the surface. And I think Kirk drew that out, which
Right.
resulted in her spurning Apollo and him having a
Yeah,
meltdown.
but that was a conflict for her because she is not super happy doing that. In spite of what Kirk told
True.
her, she
Yeah.
knows that that's not what her heart wants her to do.
True. And that
So,
shows her
yeah.
strength of character that she was able to do it.
Hmm. Yeah.
She was able to see the logic in what Kirk was saying, and she was able to override the irrational side of her and do this because this is better for humanity. I think that
Right.
shows a lot of strength to her character.
That leads to Apollo becoming extremely angry. creates all sorts of storm and everything. It's that was a really fascinating scene. Captain Kirk's plan itself of drawing her first, putting her in a safe zone, and then destroying the temple. But
Yeah,
instead, he had to speed up the whole thing and get Apollo to the temple so quickly. That's what they
true.
did, and ended up destroying the temple. And that last dialogue was really, really poignant. Very powerful stuff that Apollo
Things
said,
like a
but it's too little too late, I think.
it's also a fact that they could not have gathered those laurel leaves for Apollo because they would have been slaves.
Hmm.
Now, in hindsight, because Apollo was upset and because he faded away,
Hmm.
Kirk feels guilty and he thinks maybe he could have gathered those laurel leaves, and he's thinking about how civilization was built,
Hmm.
at least Greek civilization was built because of beings like Apollo. In
Hmm.
hindsight, that is a point, but in that moment, there's no way any of them could have done what Apollo wanted, because that
Right.
would have taken them back, what, 5,000 years. They would
Hmm.
have gone back to being shepherds with a
Hmm.
capricious god watching over them. And I don't know, I mean, how many of them would he have struck down in a fit of anger or pique? You never know.
One thing I noticed was very powerful to go with the episode was the music. Apollo,
Oh
the theme
yes,
that went with
that
his
was
majestic
amazing.
appearance,
Yeah.
and at the end, there was just a simple oboe playing for Apollo. Because there's the god of music, it's sort of the whole theme was done very well.
True. I would have loved to hear a lyre, but I don't think we heard it. But
Yeah.
yeah, but true.
Yeah.
The music was it fit the episode very well. And I also think the actor who played Apollo, he did
Yeah.
a stupendous job.
The right emotions at the right time at the right level. It
And
wasn't overdone.
he showed the exact level of, very convincing capriciousness. He terrifies
Hmm.
you. You don't
Oh,
know.
oh, no doubt. That brings us to the likes and dislikes section.
Yeah.
We've already started talking about it, but here you go. Maybe under this likes and dislikes, one I've already talked about the music to
Ah,
go with
yeah.
Apollo, and
Yeah.
Michael Frost's acting was really good.
I really liked how Spock kept things together on the Enterprise while Kirk was trying to keep things together down there on that planet. And once they got in touch, they were able to work with each other so well that they brought down the temple. And I really liked that level of humanity and coordination and how well these people worked together to rid themselves of something that is utterly terrifying like Apollo. That's something I really, really liked in this episode. I also like Chekhov. And okay, so the thing I did not like the costumes, I swear. I mean, it looked to me like they were wearing rags, and I, no, no, I do think that it was a little too revealing for Star Trek. And frankly, one more thing that I did not quite like in this episode was it is a little too sensuous for Star Trek, in my opinion.
Mm,
And there was a little too much shown, and the costumes were too revealing. And it felt a little disconnected from what we've been watching up to this point. And
mm,
I can't say I liked that as
mm.
much. The costumes were a real bugbear for me. So that's what I
Oh.
really disliked.
I like the Russian quips. So
Oh yeah,
that's going to be
absolutely.
a thing with Chekhov's character from now on. The fact that they had a Scotty, Apollo, Carolyn love triangle was interesting. For me, that was an interesting bit that they had done. Not in your face kind of thing, because if that had been done, then the story would have lost its potency. So I think
Yeah,
they kept it at a subtle level. Scotty getting really angry, but then here Apollo is a god, he can easily overpower. And then this Carolyn who's spurning Apollo because her
yeah,
duty was there. So all
true.
that was done very well. The alternate theories totally intrigued me. I mean, we've taken Greek mythology as mythology. There's just stories, is what we have taken it to be. But could there be a different way to look at it? So that's what this
True.
episode sort of brings to light. So that was interesting for me. I really like that, because all these stories we read in different civilizations, do they have basis of truth in them? Was it based on a person that somebody saw, and was it distorted over time? That's the question that this episode really brings to the surface.
They were playing up upon that ancient astronaut trope. So it was
Hmm.
interesting. The gods of the past were actually spacefarers. That's a very interesting
Hmm.
theory.
Another aspect of this episode that I liked was the problem solving process itself that was followed.
Yes.
They try everything systematically. They say, okay, here's a force field. What do you do to negate it? We
Yeah.
do X. Then, okay, that didn't work. Okay, now try forward and backward lurch. Let's try that. And then they go systematically try to figure out all aspects and do it. That's the part really fascinated me. Spock, of course, led the whole thing. We already talked about his leadership skills,
Hmm.
but
Hmm.
this is problem solving at its best, according to me,
Yeah.
from what they've
True.
shown it to us.
True. I'm
Yeah.
also, it's also good to see that they actually had time to test out all of their theories. Given Apollo's capricious nature, suppose he had sensed that they were attempting to break free from his hold, you never know what
Hmm.
he would have done. So it's
Right.
good that they
Right.
got the time to test out their theories and finally arrive at that one thing that could punch holes in the force field.
Absolutely. So that brings us to the last part of our episode, which is what would you ask the screenwriter if they were to appear in our episode to change or to explain?
I think I would have liked to see a couple of those Greek gods, first of all.
Okay.
The
Okay.
others, any one of them. There were so many of them. It
Hmm.
doesn't mention all of them, and there were so many major and minor Greek gods. I kind of wish we had seen at least one. At least one.
Hmm.
That would have been
Hmm.
interesting. And please change the costumes.
I knew that was going to come.
I knew that was, yeah, you knew that was coming. Yes, please
Yeah,
change
yeah,
the
yeah.
costumes. Another thing, one more thing I would have liked to see is some lyre music. Would have been very interesting. Yeah.
Yes. For
What about
my
you?
part, I noticed a flaw, which
Yeah.
is basically when Spock is up there and they're tracking life forms, Spock clearly refers to Apollo by name. He says, "But what about Apollo?" And he says, "Oh,
Yeah.
there he's with one more life form." And Spock actually does not know that this is Apollo. Or they only the landing party gets to know that
Knows
this is
that this is
Apollo.
Apollo.
He doesn't announce himself while as a transmission to the bridge, but only the landing party knows. So I'd
Yeah.
probably say, "Oh, the alien." That would be better rather than referring to him by name because they don't know. That was a great episode. Thank you so much, Parvati, for your
Yeah.
intense analysis. And thanks, listeners, for listening up to here. And we'll see you in the next episode. Thank you and bye.
Bye, everyone.
That brings us to the end of this episode. Thank you for listening to the podcast Enterprise. Please do share your reviews with us and please share this podcast with any of your writing friends or trickies. Live long and prosper.